Today we will look at tenses in English grammar. So let's look at the most common, or arguably the only, English grammar tenses. Simple present. I write daily. That's something that you habitually do. It's a general thing that happens over time. It's just a common habit. Simple past. I wrote daily. So that's something that was habitual for you. It was something that you used to do in general all the time. Like you go to school, you walk your dog, you brush your teeth, you go to sleep, you go running, you read, whatever it is that you do in general. But there's a stop has been put to it, and it's now in the past. So I wrote daily. Something happened to stop you from writing because it's no longer happening. But when it was happening, it happened often. It was normal. It was a habit. Simple future. I will write daily. So you have a plan to make writing a habitual, common thing that you do in general every single day, daily. So that's something that you don't currently do, but in the future, it will be something that you do on the regular, that you do daily, every day. Okay, on to the next one, present continuous. I am writing. With this tense, we're talking about what you are currently doing, what you're at this moment doing. So at this moment, I am speaking for me. But if I was writing or typing, then I would say I am writing or I am typing. Okay? But let's say I'm doing that. So maybe I'm typing or writing and then I stop. Then it would be the past continuous. I was writing. So for example, if somebody wants to ask you, what were you doing yesterday at noon? You could say, I was writing. I was writing my job application, the motivation letter for my job application, or I was writing my essay for school, right? It's no longer happening, but it was happening at that moment in time. Future continuous. I will be writing. So you can ask the same question, but for tomorrow. What will you be doing at noon tomorrow? I will be typing my essay. I will be writing my motivation letter. I will be speaking into a camera for an educational video. Okay, a plan for tomorrow. Next one, present perfect. So a little tip to remember what the perfect tenses are is that they have in there somewhere, somehow. So perfect and have, they go together. Think of them as a married couple, have and perfect. Okay, so present perfect, present. I have written. So that's something that you have already done. It's in the past. But it's a little bit different than the simple past, which was I wrote. I have written and I wrote. So I have written, it's something that you have done, and it's a recent action. So it's not, and it often will only refer to something that you've done once. So I have written my motivation letter for my job application. You wouldn't say, or you could say it in this context, but that's more likely, that's a little bit more specific. It's more like you'll say when somebody asks you, did you write your motivation letter for the job application yet? You would say, yes, I have written my job application motivation letter. But if it was something that you did maybe a few years ago, or that you did on a daily basis, you can say, I wrote high school essays every single week. So when you were a high school student, it was something in the past, and it might have been something that was done habitually. Whereas the present perfect is more of something like a one-off or something that's been done recently. So it is an action in the past, but a recent action in the past. Okay. Past perfect. I had written. So let's say yesterday you wrote your motivation letter, your cover letter, for this wonderful job that you're super excited for, right? Okay, you wrote it. And then when you showed it to a friend to peer review it and give you some tips and some feedback before sending it off, they said, can I see the vacancy description again? And then they take a look at it and they realize that there are some discrepancies. You focus mainly on points X, Y, and Z, but they are asking for a candidate with points A, B, and C, which you don't even mention once in either your motivation letter or your CV, perhaps. So then you realize this is not a good cover letter. I need to rewrite it. So somebody may ask you today, did you write your cover letter yesterday or your motivation letter yesterday? You can say, yes, I had written it, but then Karen told me that X, Y, and Z were not in the job description, so I needed to rewrite it and focus on A, B, and C. So it's something that is you had done, okay, in the past there, in that case. So it was something you had written, but there needs to be more action taken on that topic, right? Okay. Future perfects. I will have written. So somebody says, wow, you didn't finish your cover letter yet? Isn't it due tomorrow? Isn't the deadline tomorrow at noon? Then you will say, yes, by noon tomorrow, I will have written it. So by this point, it'll have been something in the past. We're not there yet. We're still over here in the unwritten zone. But at noon tomorrow, at that point, your writing, which hasn't been done yet, will have been in the past. It will be behind you. You're not there yet, but you're guaranteeing that once you're here, you'll have done the writing that you need to do. So it's also known as procrastination, right? Good. Okay, our last tense here, the perfect continuous and perfect continuouses, as I like to call them. The present perfect continuous. I have been writing. So this one is a little bit different. It's a combination of, as the name says, of the perfect and the continuous, right? So I am writing is something that I'm doing right now, and I have written is something that I've done in the past. So it's something that you're trying to say is an ongoing action, an ongoing thing. So I have been writing a grammar book. That's what I would say basically every single day last year in 2019. When people ask me, what have you been spending your time doing? I would have answered, I have been writing a grammar textbook. Because it was something I already had completed a portion of and that I was currently working on. I worked on it every single day, so there wasn't a day that went by that I didn't work on it over the period of months that I was writing that book. And then I also had plans to continue writing in the future. So I have been writing. You started it, you're doing it now, and you're doing it in the future, most likely. Okay, next tense. Past perfect continuous. I had been writing. So let's take an example. On my trip last year in 2019 to the United States, I did not get to spend a lot of time with my family, even though I went to visit my family, because I had been writing a grammar textbook. It was something that I was in the middle of in the past. So it wasn't the beginning of me doing it. It wasn't the end of me doing it. I was in the middle of doing that. But that's in the past. That's not going on now. That's the middle of something in the past. This is where it starts to get a little bit confusing, but if you do enough exercises in my recommended textbook, the English Grammar and Use, or in the Wittenborg Engels, so exercise book English, the one that I was writing last year, then it'll help you to get the feeling for it, and you'll start to understand the fine differences between these tenses. Okay, last one, future perfect continuous. I will have been writing. So let's say you need to write a final paper for your bachelor's degree, and you're going to start writing it in April of whichever year, and you're going to finish writing it in June of whichever year. Let's just say this is a hypothetical. Then you start in April, you end in June, let's look at May of that year. Then you could say to somebody, yes, in May of that year, I will have been writing my final paper for a month. Because for a month, you had been writing already at that point. So you are not there yet. Let's say you're saying this in February of that year. Then you would say to your friend, in May, I will have been writing my final paper for a month. So I should have a good idea of my thesis statement, for example. Inconsistent use of tenses in writing. We have some examples for you here. Let's have a look. The first example. We were walking along the canal when a bike hits us out of nowhere. You may have seen something like this in some kinds of books you've read, or in some type of creative writing, or a magazine article, on a blog, on a website, something like that. However, it is not proper correct English. So unless you're using it for a creative, stylistic reason, you should not be changing tenses like this within a sentence. Often within a paragraph, also not, but that will depend on the context. So for academic writing, we would want to stay consistent with our tenses at least within a sentence, unless there is an exception or a reason that calls for it. However, here there is no reason to call for changing your tense. So we should correct this. The correction: we were walking along the canal when a bite hit us out of nowhere. Yep. Next example. I realized that I have to submit my paper yesterday. That doesn't make any sense, does it? Correction. I realized that I had to submit my paper yesterday. So you can also say, I realized that I have to submit my paper tomorrow. Then it would be correct because tomorrow is in the future then. So that's something that you would have to do in the future. But since it's something that needed to have been done in the past, then you need to make sure that the tense is correct. Okay, so here are some tips to help you out. When you're speaking about fictional characters, stick to the simple present. I actually would argue that in most cases for academic writing, you should also stick to the simple present if it makes sense to do so. It's usually your safest, cleanest, clearest tense to write in. So for example, Harry Potter displays great courage throughout the series, not Harry Potter displayed great courage throughout the series. So even though the series has been completed, all of the books in the Harry Potter series have been written, these actions are, in theory, in the past. It's a bit strange to say this. Why? For several reasons. For example, not everybody reads the series at the same times. You could be saying something, you could be writing this to a reader who has not yet read the series or has not yet completed the series, so it sounds off to them to read it in past tense because to them, in their mind, it's still going on. Also, some books are set in the future, so it's a little bit strange to speak of something that theoretically wouldn't have been happening until the future in past tense. It's also just cleaner and easier to understand when you read in a simple present. So that is why we recommend for academic writing also just to stick to the simple tense when possible. Okay, the next one. Mixed tenses can be used if, so always an exception in English, if you're shifting from a general description to a more specific description. So for example, brutal honesty gets Karen into trouble sometimes. She lost her last job because of her honesty. So even though we're sticking to the simple present in the first part of this sentence, saying that she gets into trouble often, we want to use a specific example to show how it's gotten her into trouble in the past. That's why we would say she lost her job because of her honesty, because it's something that did happen in the past. It's not something that is happening now. It's not something that's going to happen in the future, at least not that we can say for sure. There are conditional cases where you can say she is always losing jobs. Perhaps she has a history of losing jobs for this reason. Then that would be appropriate. But the writer here is really specifying the one instance where she lost her job because of it. So then it's okay. You can shift if it makes sense to do so in the context. But it shouldn't be something that happens every single sentence or that you should just do without thinking twice about it.